Ambush at dawn. The parched earth, a fractured mosaic under Dusty's weathered boots, exhaled a tawny cloud with each footfall, the gritty powder ghosting in the still air. 2 days he'd chased a wandering mare, the trail spiraling deeper into this sun-bleached desolation, a place where civilization was only a fading memory. But it wasn't the horse prickling his skin now. Above, vultures wheeled in a tighter gyre than usual, their sable forms etching a grim ballet against the pearl-gray sky. He shaded his eyes, the sun a molten brand, a scar upon the landscape, where the land sagged into a shallow declivity. A jumble of overturned wagons lay strewn, their canvas covers rent and snapping like the tattered wings of grounded gulls. Silence hung heavy. No wisp of campfire smoke, no sign of anyone living. Only the sinister circling of carrion birds. Dusty spurred Cricket, his Appaloosa, into a canter. The closer he drew, the more the tableau morphed into a waking nightmare. Bodies sprawled amidst the splintered wood and scattered goods, limbs askew, faces frozen in silent agony. The coppery reek of spilled blood, thick enough to taste, burned in his throat. Then a sound, a faint, thin thread of a whimper. Dismounting, Winchester at the ready, he surveyed the carnage. 3 bandits, faces swathed in bandanas, were pawing through a wagon, flinging clothing and belongings aside like discarded rags. Their callous laughter grated against the backdrop of death. "Anything worth a damn?" one drawled, voice a rasp. "Just gewgaws and garbage." Another spat, punctuating the statement with a wad of tobacco juice. "Hold on," he continued, plucking out a silver locket. "Looks like someone favored pretty things." Dusty moved with fluid silence, boots sinking into the yielding grit. Circling the wagon, he hugged the shadows. Then he saw them, the women, huddled, bound by coarse ropes, eyes huge with terror. Some were young, barely women grown. Others bore the deep furrows of hardship carved into their faces. Their clothes, cheap and ill-fitting, offered little protection, and their bare feet were stained with desert dust and blood. A brand, a crude circle bisected by a line, seared their shoulders. The mark was instantly recognizable. The Crimson Lily, a notorious den of vice in the territory's most forsaken town. These weren't hopeful pioneers, eager settlers. They were human chattel, destined for a life of captivity and shame. A cold, hard knot of fury tightened in Dusty's gut. He'd witnessed brutality before, but this felt different, a profane desecration. He recalled his own mother, the tireless grit in her calloused hands, the boundless affection shining in her eyes. These women deserved a better fate. He could turn back, feign ignorance. Prudence urged him to retreat. 3 against 1, heavily armed, with nothing to forfeit. But he was unable, utterly, completely unable. He drew a deep breath, the desert air searing his lungs. Raising his rifle, he embraced the familiar comfort of the cold steel against his cheek. "All right, you scum-sucking polecats," he bellowed, his voice shattering the morning stillness. "This ends here. The outlaw's world, faces twisting in disbelief and rage." The one clutching the locket dropped it as his hand reflexively darted for his firearm. Dusty allowed no time for reaction. He fired, the rifle thundering against his shoulder. The nearest bandit collapsed, a bloom of crimson staining his shirt. The other 2 scrambled for cover behind the wagon, unleashing a volley of gunfire. Bullets screamed past Dusty's head, showering him with sand. He dove behind Cricket, using the animal's solid frame as a bulwark. Sighting carefully, he squeezed the trigger again, catching one of the assailants in the leg. The man shrieked, clutching at the wound. The 3rd bandit, a feral snarl contorting his features, surged towards Dusty, a knife flashing in his grip. Dusty dodged the attack, swinging the rifle, but in a brutal arc that connected with the bandit's skull. The man crumpled, unconscious. Reloading with swift efficiency, his heart hammered against his ribs. The wounded bandit was attempting to crawl away, leaving a bloody trail in the sand. Dusty leveled his rifle. "Freeze!" he commanded, his voice a low snarl. "Or I'll finish you." The bandit stilled, pupils dilated with terror. Dusty approached warily, rifle unwavering. He kicked the knife aside, then secured the man's hands behind his back with a leather thong. He turned to the women, his harsh gaze softening. They remained huddled, their eyes reflecting a tangle of fear and nascent hope. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice rough with concern. One of the women, her face bearing a landscape of bruises, shook her head. They murdered the others," she whispered, her voice barely audible. A wave of grief washed over Dusty. He knelt beside her, extending a hesitant hand towards her shoulder. "I'm going to get you out of this," he vowed. "I promise you." The lone survivor. The desert wind, a raspy whisper, clawed at Dusty as he fought for his life. Each blast from his revolver hammered against the sandstone bluffs, an abrupt cadence to the bandit's ragged fusillade. He dove behind a shattered wagon wheel, the sharp tang of burnt powder biting at his throat. Ammunition dwindling. Damn it all. A quick peek revealed two less, but a quartet remained, their eyes gleaming with a feral hunger unrelated to thirst. He couldn't win a stand-up brawl. Wit was his only weapon. Dusty edged along the wagon, using it to screen his advance toward the horses. A slug hissed past his temple, close enough to singe his hair. He cursed, a jolt of pure adrenaline sharpening his senses. Those horses were the key. He reached a nervous bay, its eyes rolling in panic. A soft word, a gentle hand, and he calmed the beast enough to loosen its tether. He vaulted onto its back in one fluid motion honed by years in the saddle. "Come get some, you buzzards," he roared, baiting them. They swallowed it whole, charging with murderous intent. Dusty kneed the bay forward, leading them away from the carnage. He snaked through the debris field, the horses' hooves drumming a frantic rhythm on the hard-packed earth. Then a sudden pivot, circling back behind them. Opportunity flared. A precise shot felled one brigand, then another. Hesitation flickered across the faces of the remaining two, their bravado cracking. Dusty seized the moment, firing again. One dropped like a puppet with cut strings. The last turned tail, vanishing into the scrub. Dusty dismounted, legs unsteady. The ensuing silence was a suffocating blanket after the cacophony. He trudged back to the wreckage, boots crunching on splinters and scattered goods. He had to search. Dread curdled in his stomach. He moved from wagon to wagon, his heart a lead weight in his chest. Most were beyond salvation. Then, in the final wagon, obscured by a heap of blankets, a tremor of movement. He yanked back the coverings, revealing a young woman, her eyes wide with terror. Her face was smeared with dust and streaked with tears. Her clothes were ripped, but a spark of defiance still burned within. "It's over," Dusty said, his voice a low rumble of reassurance. "They're gone." She flinched at the sound, but didn't cry out. Instead, she fixed him with a gaze that seemed to bore into his soul, searching for a hint of falsehood. Are they really gone?" she whispered, her voice a mere thread. "Yes," Dusty affirmed, his gaze unwavering. "It's finished." He helped her rise. She was unsteady, her body trembling like a leaf in a storm. He felt her vulnerability, her raw pain. "What's her name?" he inquired softly. "Alara," she replied, a tremor of strength returning to her voice. "Alara Moreau." "Dusty Rivers," he responded. "We need to get you out of this place, Alara." He guided her to his horse, assisting her as she mounted behind him. She clung to him, her body pressed against his back, her heart a frantic drum against his spine. He nudged the bay forward, turning his back on the scene of devastation. They rode in silence, the only sounds the steady cadence of the horses' hooves and the mournful sigh of the desert wind. As they rode, Dusty glanced back at Alara. Her eyes were shut, her face ashen. He knew a treacherous journey lay ahead, but abandoning her was unthinkable. He had made a vow, not just to her, but to himself. He would safeguard her. He would guide her to safety. The sinking sun painted the desert with strokes of fire and amethyst, casting elongated shadows that danced like specters. Dusty urged the horse onward, toward the horizon, toward an uncertain future. Behind them, the vultures began their grim ballet. Cave of Healing. Ivy, like grasping claws, concealed the cave's entrance, a shadowed mouth in the ochre cliff. Dusty dismounted, wary, his gaze sweeping for lingering bandits. He'd stumbled upon a refuge, a stroke of luck, a dark crevice offering sanctuary from the sun's brutal glare. He eased Alara from the mare's back, her weight surprisingly substantial. Her face, pale and streaked with grime and old blood, tugged at him. Inside, the air shifted, cooler and laced with the scent of damp earth and a sharp, metallic tang. The space was cramped, headroom scarce. Filtered sunlight, fractured by the ivy, painted shifting mosaics on the uneven ground. Gently, he lowered Alara onto the bedroll, his brow etched with concern. A gash marred her arm, coupled with a livid bruise blooming on her temple. He coaxed water from his canteen, cleansing the wound. Alara flinched, eyes fluttering open. Dusty. Her voice was a dry rasp. "Hush," he murmured, his tone unexpectedly tender against the backdrop of his gruff demeanor. "Just rest." He fashioned a bandage from a strip of his shirt, binding her arm. He'd mended far worse injuries on the trail, yet Alara's fragility stirred something unfamiliar within him. A possessive protectiveness he hadn't anticipated. Leaving her to slumber, he ventured out, intent on securing the horses and foraging. The terrain was merciless, arid, rocky, and sparsely adorned with vegetation. He discovered a meager spring trickling down a rock face, enough for the horses and a precious reserve. Sustenance proved elusive. He laid a few snares, hoping for a rabbit or something similar, but his expectations remained tempered. Back in the hollow, Alara still slept, her brow furrowed in a distressed frown, her breathing shallow and erratic. He sat by her side, attuned to her fitful slumber. Fragments of words, whispers of past terrors, reached his ears. He kindled a small fire, seeking solace more than warmth. The dancing flames projected phantasmal shapes onto the cave walls, conjuring an illusion of life. He watched Alara, his gaze unwavering. He lacked extensive medical knowledge, but he possessed a talent for vigilance, for waiting, for safeguarding what now rested within his purview. Hours bled into one another. The sun surrendered to the horizon, igniting the sky with vibrant hues. The desert air sharpened, a frigid bite on exposed skin. Alara stirred, her eyes snapping open, reflecting stark fear. "It's all right," Dusty reassured her, his voice a calming balm. "You're safe now. You're in a cave. Nobody will harm you here." Her gaze darted anxiously around the confined space, her breath hitching in ragged gasps. "The men," she breathed, her voice trembling on the edge of sob. They were going to." He silenced her with a gentle hand. "They're gone. All gone. I won't let anyone hurt you, Alara. I promise you." He offered water, which she accepted with desperate eagerness. All he could provide for food was strips of dry jerky. She consumed them slowly, tentatively, as if questioning her right to them. Night descended, ushering in a piercing wind. Alara sought the meager comfort of the fire, her eyes still wide with lingering dread. Sleep remained a distant prospect. Every rustle of leaves, every twig snapping in the distance, sent tremors through her frame. Dusty remained a silent figure beside her, his rifle held ready across his lap. He offered no empty reassurances. Instead, he offered his presence, a steadfast sentinel against the encroaching darkness. He understood that he couldn't erase the past, couldn't undo the torment she'd endured, but he could offer her sanctuary. He could offer her a shield. He could offer her an opportunity to mend. And in watching over her, he began to comprehend that protecting Alara transcended mere duty. It was evolving into something essential, a primal urge, a necessity of his own. Whispers of the past. The fire popped, etching fluid silhouettes against the cavern's rough-hewn face. Alara, swathed in Dusty's heavy blanket, huddled close. The fever had lifted, leaving her drained, yet clear-eyed. She nibbled at dried venison, her gaze lost in the middle distance. Dusty watched, his own expression a closed book. He'd granted her quiet, sensing its necessity, but questions nagged at him, a relentless undercurrent. He needed to decipher the shadows dwelling in her pupils. No pressure, he rumbled, his voice a gravelly whisper. But if you want to unburden yourself, Ilara's head lifted, her eyes finding his. A fragile trust flickered there, like candlelight in a draught. She swallowed, the bob of her throat her only answer. Before, she breathed, barely audible, before they stole me away. I lived in a village nestled beside the river. My father was a weaver. His rugs were vibrant tapestries of sunset hues. A faint smile graced her lips, a fleeting echo of joy. My mother cultivated a garden, a riot of herbs and blossoms. Lavender, rosemary, the air hummed with fragrance. She closed her eyes, inhaling deeply, attempting to conjure the lost perfume. I was her helper, learning which plants mended, which calmed. I even concocted my own small remedies. Dusty listened, captivated by the gentle cadence of her voice, a sharp contrast to the haunted depths he'd witnessed. He conjured an image of her in that garden, a girl amidst life's burgeoning abundance. It was a far cry from their brutal present. We were content, she resumed, a tremor entering her tone. Uncomplicated, but at peace. Then they descended. The light in her eyes guttered, replaced by a desolate blankness. She wrapped her arms around herself, a shiver tracing its way across her frame, despite the blaze. Bandits. They savaged our village. Slaughtered so many. My father, he stood against them. The words caught in her throat, an insurmountable obstacle. Dusty reached out, hesitating for a heartbeat, before resting his hand gently on her arm. Her skin felt icy, slick with perspiration. He offered a light squeeze, a wordless offering of support. She drew a ragged breath and pressed onward. They herded the women together, like livestock bound for market. I don't know their destination. We were packed into wagons, each day a repetition of misery. The men, they were ravenous. Cruel. She recoiled, unable to meet his gaze, her body convulsing. I witnessed things indelible horrors. Dusty's jaw hardened. He could only imagine her ordeal. The powerlessness, the dread, the violation. He yearned to hunt down those perpetrators, to exact retribution for their crimes. But his immediate concern lay with Ilara. She needed him to help heal her. One of the women dared to flee, Ilara whispered, her voice a thread. They made an example. A public spectacle. Tears coursed down her cheeks, silent and unstoppable. I longed for oblivion. I prayed for release. Dusty drew her closer, encircling her shoulders with his arm. She yielded to his embrace, trembling uncontrollably. He held her securely, providing the only comfort he could muster, his presence, his unwavering strength. You're sheltered here, he murmured, his voice thick with emotion. They will never reach you again. I won't permit it. He felt her brief nod against his chest. After a prolonged silence, she spoke again, a newfound strength lacing her words. You rescued me, she declared, lifting her gaze to meet his. You gambled your life for me. What? Dusty averted his gaze, discomfited by her intensity. He was ill-accustomed to such clear seeing, unaccustomed to admiration. I couldn't abandon you to that, he muttered, shrugging awkwardly. It wasn't right, but his motivations ran deeper, a truth they both recognized. He caught sight of a resilient ember in her eyes, a gentle nature refusing to be snuffed out. He revered her tenacity, her inherent kindness, her fierce instinct to survive. She was undeniably a survivor, despite the atrocities she had endured, and he discovered himself drawn to that inner fortitude, to that radiant spark like a moth drawn to the flame. Lessons of survival. The morning's chill kissed Ilara's face as she watched Dusty ready a sturdy mare bell. Today, he rumbled, the word hanging in the frosty air. You ride. Her breath hitched. A horse had always been a distant dream. I've never, she began, her shawl a lifeline clutched in her fist. A hint of a smile played on Dusty's lips, a rare sight. Everyone begins somewhere. I'm here. He patiently showed her the reins, the stirrup. His large hands were surprisingly gentle as he guided her foot. From her precarious perch atop Belle, he walked beside her, a steadying hand on her calf. Belle, bless her kind nature, moved with a soothing cadence. Dusty murmured reassurances to the horse, then to Alara. Loosen up. Feel her. She'll listen, but you must speak clearly. Initially rigid, Alara gradually relaxed. The mare's rhythmic gait had a meditative effect. She hung on Dusty's every word, absorbing his knowledge like a sponge. Before long, she was guiding Belle, a thrill blossoming with each responsive step. Later, against a backdrop of jagged rock, Dusty positioned targets. He offered Alara a rifle, its heft unexpected. Shooting, he began, his gaze intense. It's a different beast than riding. Not about mastery, but accuracy. A choice made, and then lived with. The gunshot roared as Dusty demonstrated, making Alara flinch. The recoil rocked him, yet he remained planted. He reloaded with practiced efficiency. Your turn. The rifle felt alien and cold in her trembling hands. The memory of the bandits, the crackle and spit of their weapons, rose unbidden. Fear threatened to root her to the spot. Dusty saw her struggle. You don't need to do this. She lifted her chin, meeting his gaze. No, she declared, the word surprising even herself. I must learn. He instructed her on stance, sight, breath. The first few shots went wide, erupting dust and sending pebbles skittering. A wave of discouragement washed over her. Squeeze, don't yank, Dusty corrected, his tone unwavering. Breathe. See only the target. She inhaled deeply, clearing her mind, and squeezed. The rifle kicked, but this time a spark of control ignited within her. The bullet landed closer. Again and again she tried, her resolve hardening with each attempt. Slowly, painstakingly, her aim improved. The fear lingered, but it was muted by a blossoming sense of purpose. As twilight painted the sky in fiery hues, they guided their mounts toward their meager camp. The air turned biting, the shadows stretched like long fingers. Dusty coaxed a fire to life, its flames a vibrant dance against the encroaching darkness. Abruptly, a guttural growl ripped through the stillness. Belle startled, her eyes wide with fear. Dusty reacted instantly, rifle raised, pushing Alara behind him. 2 points of emerald fire emerged from the tree line. Wolves, lean, hungry, and large. They circled, their snarls a chorus of menace. Dusty fired a shot skyward, a blunt warning. They didn't flinch, emboldened by their desperation. Stay behind me, Dusty commanded, his voice a low, steady current. Keep the fire fed. Alara grabbed an armful of dry kindling and tossed it onto the blaze. The flames roared, a temporary reprieve against the encroaching gloom. But the wolves were relentless. One broke the circle, lunging. Dusty fired, the shot finding its mark. The wolf howled, collapsing, its pack momentarily stunned. But they remained, circling, patient. He reloaded, his movements a blur of practiced efficiency. His gaze flickered to Alara. Her face was pale, but her eyes reflected a fierce determination. A silent understanding passed between them. She wasn't the frightened girl he'd rescued. She was evolving. She was surviving. And she was ready. The abandoned homestead. The wolves vanished as abruptly as they'd materialized, swallowed whole by the timber's dense embrace. After a meticulous sweep, Dusty declared the area secure enough for a night's respite. Yet, unease lingered. Their proximity felt deliberate, a boldness that spoke of shifting dynamics in the mountains. Or perhaps he'd merely been too preoccupied with Alara's well-being to notice before. The following day, they rode for long hours, the harsh, angular terrain yielding to gentler undulations adorned with the shimmering green of aspen stands. As the afternoon waned and the sun began its descent behind the western peaks, Dusty drew Cochise to a halt. A discordant note in the natural harmony had caught his eye. What is it? Alara murmured, her voice barely audible. Her vigilance had sharpened, her gaze constantly assessing their surroundings. "Looks like a home site," Dusty replied, his attention riveted on the distant anomaly. They urged their horses onward, the air heavy with the resinous scent of pine and the musk of damp earth. Breaking free of the trees, the homestead stood revealed, a tableau of neglect. The central structure, a single-room cabin of logs, slumped wearily, its roof partially caved. Empty window frames presented vacant, soulless stares upon the wilderness. A rickety barn tilted at a precarious angle, its doors agape like broken hinges. A rusted plow lay like a forgotten sentinel in a field choked by a tapestry of weeds. "Think anyone's about?" Alara questioned, her hand instinctively seeking the reassurance of the rifle resting across her lap. "Doubtful," Dusty replied, dismounting. "Long abandoned." He approached the cabin warily, hand hovering near the butt of his revolver. The front door groaned open at his touch, exposing a dim, musty interior. Sunbeams, lancing through gaps in the walls, illuminated a swirling ballet of dust motes. Cobwebs festooned every surface, and the air hung thick with the aroma of decay. Despite the obvious ruin, a spark of something akin to optimism flickered within Alara. A roof, however compromised, offered more comfort than open sky. And the land, though overgrown, remained a foundation for possibilities, a promise of cultivation, a source of nourishment. Dusty emerged from the cabin, his expression somber. "Place is a shambles," he stated. "But it could be worse. One room is completely exposed, but the rest potentially usable." The ensuing days were devoted to transforming the derelict homestead into a semblance of shelter. Dusty, with his strength and practical acumen, addressed the structural deficiencies. He patched the roof with reclaimed lumber, buttressed the walls, and sealed the shattered windows. Alara, surprisingly nimble with her small hands, cleansed and organized the interior, banishing years of accumulated grime and debris. They labored as one, a silent understanding flowing between them. Dusty shared his knowledge of edible flora, while she, in turn, recounted tales of her childhood garden, evoking the vibrant tapestry of colors and the fragrant symphony of herbs and flowers she had once cultivated. One afternoon, bathed in the warmth of the sun, they stood together in the overgrown field, considering the immense task ahead. "Think we're up to it?" Alara asked, her voice tinged with uncertainty. Dusty met her gaze, his eyes softening. "We already are," he countered, gesturing towards the patch of bare earth at their feet. They dedicated the entire morning to weeding and tilling. A modest beginning, yet a beginning nonetheless. He retrieved a small pouch from his saddlebag, offering it to Alara. "Seeds," he explained. "Beans, corn, squash. Enough to sustain us through the winter." Alara accepted the pouch, her fingers tracing the coarse texture of the fabric. She inhaled deeply, drawing the earthy essence of the seeds into her lungs. A tentative smile blossomed on her face, a fragile expression of renewed hope. Together, they sowed the seeds, carefully nestling each one within the prepared soil. As they worked, Alara began to hum a soft melody, a wordless anthem of hope and rebirth. Dusty observed her, a rare smile gracing his lips. The days that followed unfurled with diligent labor and quiet camaraderie. They cleared additional land, mended the barn, and nurtured a small vegetable garden. Alara's confidence blossomed alongside the seedlings, her movements becoming more assured, her gaze more radiant. She was no longer the petrified girl he had rescued. She had transformed into a resilient woman, a builder finding strength in the crucible of adversity. One evening, as they sat by the fire, beneath a canopy of blazing stars, Alara turned to Dusty. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with gratitude. Dusty looked at her, his heart brimming with an unfamiliar tenderness. He reached out and clasped her hand, his calloused fingers gently enveloping hers. "We're in this together, Alara," he affirmed. "Always." As the flames crackled and swayed, painting their faces with shifting light, they sat in comfortable silence, envisioning a future they were cultivating seed by precious seed, day by laborious day, on this forgotten homestead nestled in the heart of the untamed wilderness. Hunted, the wind carried a new scent, one sharper than pine or damp earth. It tickled Dusty's nose as he split wood, the rhythmic thud of the axe a counterpoint to the cheerful clucking of Alara's chickens. He paused, axe suspended mid-swing, and inhaled deeply. Something was wrong. It wasn't a storm, nor a wild animal. It was malice. He wiped his brow with a calloused hand, his gaze sweeping the tree line. Alara emerged from the chicken coop, a basket of eggs nestled in her arm. "Everything all right, Dusty?" He forced a smile. "Just taking a breather. This wood's tougher than it looks." He resumed chopping, but his movements were now economical, his senses heightened. He'd lived too long on the fringes to ignore a feeling like this. Days bled into a week, and the feeling persisted. He found a discarded cigarette, but near the stream, a brand he didn't recognize. The tracks in the soft earth leading away from their property were too deliberate to be deer or elk. Someone was watching them. He started carrying his rifle everywhere. Alara noticed, her brow furrowing with concern. "Dusty, what is it? You seem different." He sighed, resting his hand on hers. "Just being cautious, Alara. Never hurts to be prepared." He hated lying to her, but he didn't want to frighten her unnecessarily. Not again. Meanwhile, 20 miles south in the dusty town of Redemption, Jedstone nursed a lukewarm beer in the dimly lit saloon. He was a lean man, his face etched with the harsh realities of a life spent tracking men for coin. His eyes, the color of flint, missed nothing. He'd been asking around, showing a crudely drawn sketch of Dusty to anyone who'd look. "Cowboy tall, scar on his jaw. Ride a roan mare?" he asked the barkeep, a sweaty man wiping down the counter. The barkeep shook his head. "Don't ring no bells. We get a lot of cowboys through here." Jed placed a silver dollar on the counter. "Think harder." The barkeep's eyes flickered to the coin. "Well, now that you mention it, there was a fella fitting that description. Headed north a few weeks back. Had a young woman with him." Jed's eyes narrowed. "North, you say? Anything else?" "Paid for supplies. Enough for a long haul. Bought a couple of chickens, too. I recall the missus saying something about that being peculiar. Most cowboys don't bother with chickens." Jed pocketed the sketch. Peculiar indeed. He finished his beer and left the saloon, the silver dollar glinting in the dying sunlight. The trail was getting warmer. Back at the homestead, Dusty was teaching Alara how to shoot. The rifle bucked against her shoulder, but she held her ground, her eyes fixed on a makeshift target. "Good," Dusty said, his voice gruff but encouraging. "Now squeeze, don't jerk." Suddenly, a raven took flight from a nearby tree, its harsh caw echoing through the valley. Dusty stiffened. "Get down, Alara." He shoved her behind a stack of firewood and scanned the tree line. He saw nothing, but the feeling of being watched intensified, pressing against him like a physical weight. He knew they were close. Too close. "We need to go," he said, grabbing Alara's hand. "Now." They saddled their horses quickly, gathering a few essentials. As they rode away, Dusty glanced back at the homestead, a knot forming in his stomach. They had built a life there, a sanctuary. Now, they were being forced to abandon it. Again, they rode hard through the night, seeking to put as much distance as possible between themselves and their pursuer. As dawn approached, they reached a rocky ridge overlooking a vast expanse of wilderness. Dusty pulled up, his gaze searching the horizon. He spotted something in the distance, a glint of sunlight reflecting off metal. A rider, and he was coming fast. "He's found us," Dusty said, his voice grim. "We need to find cover, and we need to be ready to fight." The hunt was on. Stand your ground. The wind howled a mournful tune through the skeletal branches of the cottonwoods, mirroring the unease twisting in Dusty's gut. He handed Alara the Winchester, the rifle gleaming dully in the fading light. "You know how to use it. Aim true." Alara cradled the weapon, its weight a stark reminder of their predicament. Her knuckles were white. I remember the lessons." Her voice trembled, but her eyes held a newfound resolve. They worked in tandem, barricading the windows of the main house with heavy furniture, reinforcing the doors with thick timbers salvaged from the barn. The rhythmic thud of hammer against wood was a counterpoint to the rising wind, a desperate attempt to build a fortress against the storm brewing outside. Dusty positioned sharpened stakes around the perimeter of the yard, a silent warning to anyone approaching uninvited. As darkness fully enveloped the homestead, they retreated inside. The single lantern cast dancing shadows on the walls, amplifying the silence. Dusty stoked the fire in the hearth, the crackling flames offering a small measure of comfort. Alara watched him, her expression unreadable. "Dusty," she began, her voice barely a whisper. "Why are you doing this? Risking everything for me?" He turned, his gaze meeting hers. The firelight painted his face in shades of orange and deep shadow, etching the lines of worry around his eyes. "I made a promise, Alara, to protect you." He hesitated, then added, "Besides, this place, it's not just about me anymore. It's about us." She stepped closer, her hand reaching out to touch his arm. "Dusty," she searched for the right words, the emotions swirling within her too complex to articulate. "I'm afraid." He covered her hand with his touch gentle but firm. "So am I," he admitted, the vulnerability in his voice surprising even himself. "But we'll face it together, whatever comes." Alara's eyes searched his, finding a depth of emotion she hadn't seen before. I care for you, Dusty, more than I ever thought possible." He cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs tracing the delicate curve of her cheekbones. "And I care for you, Alara, more than I can say." He leaned down and kissed her, a tender, lingering kiss that spoke volumes. It was a kiss of comfort, of reassurance, of shared fear and unwavering hope. The distant sound of barking dogs shattered the fragile peace. Dusty pulled away, his eyes hardening. "They're here." He grabbed his rifle and moved to the window, peering into the darkness. 3 riders emerged from the trees, silhouetted against the moonlit fields. The lead rider, a tall, lean figure with a cruel, angular face, dismounted. He was Jed Stone. "Rivers." Stone's voice boomed across the yard, carrying on the wind. "Come out peacefully, and maybe I'll make it quick." Dusty didn't respond. He checked the Winchester, his movements precise and deliberate. Stone chuckled, a harsh, grating sound. "Don't be a fool, Rivers. I know you're in there. I can smell your fear." He paused, and hers. Alara stood beside Dusty, her hand gripping his arm. "What do we do?" "We stand our ground," Dusty said, his voice low and steady. "We show them that this isn't just a house. It's our home." Stone took a step forward, his hand resting on the butt of his revolver. "All right, Rivers. You asked for it." He gestured to his men, who spread out, flanking the house. "Let's finish this." Dusty raised his rifle, his gaze unwavering. The firelight glinted off the barrel, a promise of deadly resistance. The wind howled louder, a mournful cry that seemed to echo the impending violence. The standoff had begun. Freedom's price. The opening shot cleaved the silence like a razor. Dusty, already anticipating the attack, shouldered his Winchester and returned fire. Stone's men scattered, seeking refuge behind the decaying barn and the wagon's skeletal frame. Beside the window, Alara, gripping the revolver Dusty had taught her to use, huddled low, her breath hitching in her throat. "Stay put." Dusty's command was a low growl. A quick glance revealed movement near the well. 2 rapid shots barked from his rifle. A stifled cry, then stillness. Alara's pulse hammered. A figure materialized from behind the barn, rifle raised. "Dusty!" she yelled, squeezing the trigger on instinct. The man stumbled, his weapon clattering uselessly. Dusty spun, ending it with a single decisive shot. A surprised look flickered across his features as he met Alara's gaze. "You okay?" She nodded, her hand trembling almost imperceptibly. I got him." The realization dawned, a chilling blend of dread and empowerment. She defended herself. She'd shielded Dusty. The firefight intensified. Bullets snapped past the glass, showering them with splinters and dust. Dusty moved with lethal economy, a dance of survival perfected over years. He used the terrain of the homestead like a weapon, funneling the attackers into deadly crossfires, preying on their greed. But they pressed on, fueled by Stone's promised riches. Alara reloaded, her movements gaining speed and precision. Breathe, aim, squeeze, Dusty's words echoed in her mind. She scanned their surroundings, senses sharpened. A fleeting shadow near the woodpile. A shot, followed by a sharp, pained squeal. Behind a fallen oak, Dusty yelled, "Alara, back door! Cover me!" Without hesitation, she scrambled across the room, peering through the warped planks. Dusty erupted from cover, sprinting towards the house, bullets tearing divots from the earth around him. Alara unleashed a torrent of fire, pinning the bounty hunters down. He reached the doorway, panting. "Good shooting," he said, a fleeting smile gracing his lips. "Let's finish this." Back to back, they formed a bulwark of gunfire and resolve. The bounty hunters, caught in a withering crossfire, began to drop. Jedstone, face a mask of fury, charged from behind the barn, firing blindly. Dusty lined up a shot, but smoke obscured his target. Sensing the opportunity, Alara fired, catching Stone in the shoulder. He roared, his rifle falling from nerveless fingers. Dusty didn't hesitate, sending a final shot that dumped Stone face first into the dirt. The remaining hunters, their resolve shattered, vanished into the landscape. The ensuing silence resonated, thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and death. Dusty lowered his rifle, his breath ragged. He turned to Alara, his expression a complex mix of pride and worry. "It's done," he rasped, his voice worn. Alara sagged against the doorframe, trembling. "For now," she breathed. Dusty knew she spoke the truth. Retribution would follow. The dream they'd nurtured here had been poisoned. He walked over, gently taking the revolver. He studied it, then met her gaze. "We can't stay," he said, his tone resolute. "They'll be back. This place, it was never truly ours to begin with." Understanding dawned in Alara's eyes. The homestead, their hope for refuge, was now a bullseye. They had fought hard, but they couldn't remain on the run indefinitely. Or could they? But not here. Not anymore. "Where to?" she whispered. Dusty gazed out at the vast plains, the sunset ablaze with fiery hues. "Somewhere they won't find us," he vowed, his voice filled with a newfound determination. "Somewhere we can finally be free." He started gathering supplies, each movement precise and economical. Alara assisted, her fear replaced by quiet resolve. They packed necessities, sustenance, water, ammunition, and a few cherished keepsakes. As they readied themselves, Alara paused, glancing back at the homestead. It stood silhouetted against the fading light, a somber monument to their fleeting peace. Turning to Dusty, her eyes reflected a blend of grief and expectation. "Let's go," she stated, her voice clear and firm. "Let's find our freedom. A new horizon." Dust kicked up a tawny cloud as they topped the rise. Below, a valley unfurled, verdant against the parched land, cradling the hamlet of Havenwood. A few hundred souls, perhaps, but tendrils of smoke signaled occupied dwellings, not just transient camps. Alara squeezed Dusty's hand, a nervous flutter in her chest, a fragile hope for sanctuary. Riding in, they became the focal point. A blacksmith's hammer stilled mid-swing. Children abandoned their chasing game. A gardener paused, her expression a blend of curiosity and welcome. She, a woman weathered by time, but radiating warmth, approached as Dusty grounded his boots. "Welcome to Havenwood," she offered, her voice a soothing balm. "I'm Martha Ainsworth. You've clearly journeyed far. What brings you here?" Dusty, guarded as ever, replied, "Just passing through, ma'am. Need a place to spell our horses." Martha's denim blue eyes lingered on Alara, seeing past Dusty's rough exterior. "Rest your horses and yourselves. The inn has rooms, and a supper waits. You both look bone-weary." The inn was modest, yet immaculate, redolent of pine and baking bread. The stew Martha pressed upon them was humble fare, but tasted like ambrosia to Alara. During the meal, Martha asked no intrusive questions, her presence a quiet comfort. The following morning, Dusty declared they'd be moving on. Alara balked. "Dusty," she whispered, "I don't want to go." He searched her face, his gaze softening. "Alara, it's just a town. We need obscurity, a place to vanish." "But maybe this is that place," she countered, tears welling. "The kindness. I feel secure here." Dusty wrestled with himself, the conflict etched on his face. He saw the fragile bloom of hope in Alara's eyes and relented. "All right," he conceded. "We'll stay. For a spell." That spell lengthened into weeks, then months. Dusty, surprisingly handy, secured work assisting the local carpenter. Under Martha's tutelage, Alara discovered a knack for herbalism, her gentle touch and innate understanding of botany making her a gifted healer. Initially wary of the reticent newcomer with haunted eyes, the townsfolk gradually thawed, recognizing their integrity and willingness to contribute. They purchased a small, weed-choked plot on the outskirts. Together, they tamed the wilderness, erected a small cabin, and coaxed a garden to life. The sharp odor of gunpowder faded from Alara's dreams, replaced by the fragrance of roses and lavender. One sunset, painting the sky in fiery hues, Dusty clasped Alara's hand on their porch. "Alara," he rasped, his voice thick with emotion, "I never imagined this. You've given me a life I never knew existed." He didn't utter the words, "I love you," explicitly, but Alara felt it in the tenderness of his touch, the naked vulnerability in his eyes. She rested her head against his shoulder, feeling the reassuring solidity of him. "We built this together, Dusty," she murmured. "We rescued each other." Years drifted by. The cabin evolved into a welcoming home, embraced by a riotous garden overflowing into the surrounding fields. Dusty became a respected rancher, his herd thriving on Havenwood's fertile pastures. Alara, renowned for her healing touch and compassionate nature, was a cherished member of the community, her comforting words and potent remedies always at hand. Their romance became local lore, shared around crackling fires and in hushed tones. The story of the scarred cowboy and the woman he'd saved, finding solace and strength in each other's embrace, a testament to the enduring power of love and resilience. The past, with its lingering ghosts and brutal realities, was never forgotten, but they refused to be shackled by it. They chose to construct a future, stone by stone, forged with love, fidelity, and unwavering devotion. Havenwood wasn't just a sanctuary, it was a foundation. And in each other, they unearthed a love that transcended all odds, a love that flourished even in the most barren landscapes, a love that was their new, boundless horizon.